My dear friend who lives next to my world, I am typing to you tonight because the city is humming, and I want you to hear how a day feels here. The street outside my window moves like a gentle march, and even the traffic lights keep time with a soft pulse that people follow without thinking. You have words that stand still on a page, yet here meaning lives in motion, and a sentence is only real when a voice carries it across a measure. I know that sounds strange, but stay with me, because what I am telling you is ordinary where I live, and it guides everything from how we greet to how we grieve. We do not speak as you do. We sing in lines that have grammar hidden in rhythm, and every promise or apology settles into a key that marks its intent. When someone asks for help, the melody rises gently, and when someone confesses a wrong, the melody relaxes into a lower phrase that invites response. Our first lessons as children are not letters, they are intervals, and we learn how kindness sits inside a major third and how honesty likes a clean cadence. Schools teach steady breath before they teach handwriting, because breath is the ink that makes law legible in the air. Let me show you one corner of law, because people always ask me how a contract can be sung without chaos. We hold a contract ceremony in a modest room, and two people face each other with a notary choir behind them. The notaries do not judge content, they witness tuning, and they confirm that both parties can sustain the key without strain. The text of the agreement is a melody that both have practiced, and meaning rides on the purity of shared pitch and pulse. If a phrase wobbles at a critical clause, the choir pauses the ceremony, and the parties rest their voices until intention is clear again. No one shouts, because volume does not win disputes here, stability wins, and the most persuasive voice is the one that can hold a line without forcing it. Our courts are quiet rooms with strong acoustics and no echo tricks, and the judge is trained to hear patterns rather than clever phrasing. Perjury is not a matter of words but of masking dissonance, and if the pattern of a statement cannot resolve, the court treats it as false. You might wonder about lawyers, and yes, we have them, and their art is arranging arguments as counterpoint that does not smother the central theme. A good advocate can let a hard truth sing without turning it into a weapon, and that skill earns deep trust here. The city itself is tuned like an instrument, and planners map neighborhoods by resonance bands rather than simple grids. Hospitals prefer a calm band that does not fatigue staff, and markets prefer bright bands that keep people alert without hurrying them into mistakes. Transit lines hum in patterns you can follow with your feet, and when a train is late, the station lowers its pulse to keep everyone from slipping into panic. We design elevators with soft ascending cues so that the body knows how many floors have passed, and the mind stays comfortable. Architecture students take harmony and structure together, and they learn to place stairwells where air naturally holds a stable tone. At festivals, the entire riverfront becomes a slow waltz, and you can hear people finding each other by leaning into the same downbeat. Commerce adapts to this with respect, and our ads must file a meter disclosure so they cannot hijack the public rhythm. There is a catchiness tax that gets higher if a jingle clings to your head for too long, because we treat attention as a shared resource. Health insurance includes voice coverage as a basic need, and employers give rest days for vocal recovery after heavy weeks. When a new shop opens, the license requires a simple greeting melody in the doorway, and people judge the welcome by how well it fits the street's natural key. Now I must tell you about something that troubles me, which is our law on silence, because it will sound harsh to you at first. We consider long, unannounced silence in crowded civic spaces a danger, not because silence is evil, but because abrupt breaks confuse coordination. Some of our worst accidents came from people failing to signal with sound, the way a driver might forget a turn signal in your world. The law grew from fear, and fear has sharp edges, and over time the rule hardened into fines and public lectures. There is a movement now that argues for the right to quiet, and they call themselves the Quiet League, and I listen to them carefully. They gather in places with protected acoustics and practice stillness together, then they draft proposals that try to make quiet a recognized mode rather than a crime. I want them to win at least part of their case, because I have known pain that only quiet can hold without breaking. This is where I tell you about Mira, my teacher who guided me when I could barely hold a pitch across a single breath. She was patient and stern, and she laughed with her eyes before she laughed with her voice, and she taught me how duty feels when it moves like a metronome. An accident took her voice one winter, and the city that once answered to her smallest cue suddenly talked past her. She learned to sketch rhythm on a small board with chalk, and I spoke for her in ceremonies until the law recognized her chalk as a voice. People argued that representation by chalk breaks tradition, but tradition protects people, not the other way around, and the court finally agreed. Her case opened a path for those who cannot sing safely, and it forced the city to fund visual readers in every office. Now in our notary rooms, a spectrum display sits beside the choir, and a signer or a rhythm tapper can enter an agreement without shame. Children who learn differently no longer fail in the first year, and our schools teach multiple channels from the first month. We call this plurality, and it is the opposite of noise, because it lets truth pick the channel where it stays sturdy. Translators work between our worlds with careful craft, and they render pitch into punctuation, and they render tempo into clause order. When I write to you, I sit with a tuning fork that I do not strike, yet its weight in my hand reminds me to keep my sentences steady. Some days I think your world has a secret rhythm anyway, because I can hear it in the way you keep lists, and the way your streets pause at corners. Music and language are cousins, yet they share a home here, and I want you to walk with me through a day that shows how the home feels. Morning begins with consent songs at work, where teams align their tasks by lining up a short cadence that confirms focus and boundaries. The cadence is not sacred, it is practical, and if someone cannot hold it that day, we move them to work that does not depend on stable breath. Lunch rush brings its own beat that I love, because friends lean into each other's timing, and the street softens to let conversations flow. In the afternoon, the municipal choir broadcasts updates on water, transit and weather, using motifs you can identify within a note or two. We treat these motifs like road signs, and we license them the way you might license colors or shapes in public service systems. In emergencies, we drop everything to a single low pulse, and the city listens, not with fear, but with shared attention. When conflict arises, our mediators invite the parties to borrow each other's themes for a moment, because respect grows when your own voice carries a piece of someone else. Forgery is a real problem here, and synthetic voices can mimic timbre too well, so authenticity checks compare the microtremors that live in live breath. We teach people how to spot recordings by listening to the places where the body would need to breathe, and if the phrase never needs air, the phrase is suspect. Criminal groups once used hidden metronomes to coach a false steadiness, and they smuggled them into hearings to cheat the system. Our answer was disarmingly simple, which was to allow cool nerves to count as skill, but to require random syncopation tests that only a present mind can pass. A court can ask a witness to rest and then pick up a line on an unexpected beat, and truth usually handles that with grace. I wish you could taste the feeling of a well-earned resolution, because when an old dispute finds a clean cadence, the room softens like rain. People do not cheer with noise, they hold a shared note for a breath or two, and then they let it go as a gift to the ones who did the work. At home, our families keep little household themes that carry memory, and mine is a quiet rising fifth that my grandmother used every evening. We do not treat this as a brand, we treat it as a welcome mat that says you belong when your heart rises with it. Lovers learn each other's thresholds not by probing questions, but by listening for where comfort lives in the measure, and they do not force modulations that the other cannot hold. Grief has its own careful practice, and the city keeps halls with supportive acoustics for mourning. We sing very little there, more like gentle lines that hold a person while they sit with what will not change. I once attended a farewell for a firefighter who lost breath in service, and the final moment was a collective rest that we were finally allowed to call sacred. That word matters, because the law is changing, and it matters that rest can be more than an empty space. For a long time, officials equated quiet with threat, and they were not entirely wrong, because silence can hide harm if it is used to smother witnesses. Yet the Quiet League taught us that quiet can also give shape to care, and that care needs protection too. Their best proposal describes quiet as a legal mode that can be announced and bounded, much like marked pedestrian space that keeps bodies safe. If you enter a marked quiet zone, you accept that certain messages will arrive by light or touch rather than sound. If you need to break the zone for safety, you can, but the default duty is to keep stillness sturdy for the duration. I helped draft testimony on this, and I argued that planned quiet is like night, which lets the city reset cells and systems without fear. The council asked the hardest question, which was how to keep the law from turning quiet into a tool of exclusion. We answered with access rules that require visual and tactile channels to be as rich as sound, and we tied funding to enforcement. The vote is close and I cannot predict it, yet even before the law changes, people act as if quiet already has standing, and that gives me hope. Economic life adjusts in interesting ways when you treat music as the primary language. Job listings include range requirements and stamina expectations and break schedules that protect voice health. People with rare timbres earn good wages in forensic work, where they detect tiny mismatches that can reveal fraud. Teachers with soft voices are prized in early childhood, while deep, steady voices excel in crisis coordination. Technology helps, but does not dominate, and we keep synthesis licensed to support rather than replace presence. Our recording industry is different from yours, because performance is also public governance here, and no one can rent a person's voice for propaganda without explicit civic consent. Copyright extends to civic motifs and not just art, because certain patterns function like traffic laws and must remain stable. The penalty for corrupting a civic motif is not prison but restoration work, and the offender must train under community supervisors to rebuild trust measure by measure. Migration brings its own beauty, and newcomers arrive with scales and rhythms that expand our palette. We run pitch acclamation workshops that teach how to speak a public apology in the home key of the city without erasing accent. Listening to those classes is humbling, because a city that can welcome new phrasing becomes wiser. I wish I could hand you our library cards, because our scores are not dusty paper, but living maps that show how stories change when a melody learns a new street. Children borrow folktales that have many versions, and each version preserves the feeling but changes the tempo, so that a child with a different brain can find a path through it. In this way, tradition stays alive without becoming a cage, and we track lineage with care so no one is erased. I want to circle back to Mira, because she would scold me if I left her as a symbol rather than a person. She loved black tea and late afternoons, and she kept a row of old tuning forks on her shelf like a tiny forest. After her accident, she found pleasure in teaching through touch, and she built drills with a metronome that a student could feel through the table. The drills look simple, yet they teach patience faster than any lecture, because the hand can feel when the mind wanders. She told me that truth needs a rhythm that a body can keep even during sorrow, and I repeat that to myself when life wobbles. The day the court recognized chalk as a legal voice, she walked into the hall without fear, and the clerk placed the spectrum reader on her desk like a torch. We celebrated by taking a slow walk along the river, and the city felt wide and forgiving that evening. I wish you could have been there, because you would have smiled at how soft people became when they saw the new rule in action. When people talk about progress, they often imagine bigger sounds, but sometimes progress is a stable rest that lets wounded lungs breathe. That is why I feel gentle pride when I think about the Quiet League, since they pushed us to grow without shouting at anyone. Their rallies do not chant, they stand calmly and hold signs that shimmer with small reflective lines, and the effect is surprisingly moving. It is hard to hate someone who is careful with your ears, and that is a lesson I want to carry across worlds. You might want to ask whether music ever lies here, and the answer is that music can mislead the lazy listener just like words can. We defend ourselves by training attention, and schools teach how to hear a sweet phrase that hides a cruel demand beneath it. The method is simple and slow, and it asks students to imagine the phrase as a scaffold, then to test whether it can hold its own weight when the tempo changes. Cruelty often collapses when you remove the rush that props it up, and young ears learn that before they can vote. I am grateful for that, because it keeps demagogues from owning the air. We also maintain a public archive of motifs used by leaders, so that no one can pretend a dangerous pattern is new. When a leader attempts to revive a banned cadence, the archive flags it, and the city holds an open review before any damage spreads. You may hear caution in all this, and you are right. We are careful with sound the way you are careful with clean water. We wash it when it gets dirty, and we ration it when a crisis needs clarity. The system is not perfect, and sometimes kindness and safety pull in different directions, and that is when wise people must guide us. I try to be one of those people on my small street, and I fail often, yet the neighbours still nod when our themes meet. There is humour here too, because people can be silly anywhere, and I once saw a baker sell loaves with tiny melody stickers that played a resting cue when the bread finished cooling. Customers lined up not just for taste but for the pleasure of hearing a quiet little finish, and the line became a steady chorus that made the morning feel crisp. We tease each other about our favourite keys, the way people tease each other about sports teams, and no one gets hurt if a joke lands off beat. My own habit is to end evenings in a mellow mode that keeps my mind honest, and I keep a simple instrument by my desk as a gentle anchor. Before I sleep, I write to you, or to others like you in neighbouring worlds, because letters let me shape my thoughts without imposing my city's sound on yours. You might think I miss noise or I crave it, yet I do not, because most loudness here feels like a mistake or a prank, and we tire of both quickly. What I miss is your crisp silence, that is not a law, but a choice. Because choice is a beautiful instrument when it is tuned to care. I imagine you reading this on a calm evening, perhaps with a soft lamp nearby, and I hope you can hear what I mean without hearing what I hear. If I could give you one tool, it would be a habit of measured breath, since breath is the smallest metronome that still changes a life. Take 3 slow breaths before a difficult message, and notice how your mind sets a pulse for your next sentence. Your world may not sing its contracts, yet your body still knows when a promise has a steady beat. You can test this by remembering a promise that felt wrong, because I am sure you will recall a kind of lurch or tug in your chest. That is your inner ear warning you that the phrasing will not hold, and I believe people across worlds share this signal. We are not better for singing and you are not lesser for speaking, we are simply different, and difference is delicious when it is generous. I want to tell you one last story before I sign off, and it is about a quiet vote that changed a neighbourhood. Our block used to suffer from nightly disputes about street music that played too late, and the arguments were sharp and weary. The city offered us a heavy rule that would have solved the noise but crushed the joy, and we asked for a week to try something else. We met in the old library where the walls still hold the breath of decades, and we drafted a rotating quiet window that moves like a tide. Each building takes a turn, keeping the early night calm, while others host guests, and the next evening the roles switch, and so on. People signed by singing the simple schedule, and they meant it, and the block has been at peace for months. We did not need a ban, we needed a rhythm that let everyone keep a piece of what they loved, and that is a lesson I hope travels well. I think about you walking in a city that speaks, and I hope you listen for the measures hidden in ordinary life. Try to notice the way crosswalks pace a crowd, and the way a cafe falls into hush when someone begins a hard story. Those are your civic motifs, and they deserve care the way ours do. The neighbour's cat is prowling on the window rail, and the evening chorus is starting at the park, and I should close for now. Know that I care about your comfort even though I have never seen your street, and know that distance shrinks when people hold a steady line together. I will write again if you want me to, and I will tell you how border diplomacy works across canyons when each side plays a different mode. That is for another night, and I smile as I type that, because the thought of it fills me with a bright courage. From your friend who lives next to your world with a steady breath and a kind beat, I send warmth across the thin wall between us. Thank you for staying with my letter until the last line. Your time and your attention mean more to me than you know. Please tap like, subscribe to Multiverse Pen Pals, and leave a comment with a thought you want me to carry into the next letter. If you wish to support the channel, you can donate through the QR code in the bottom right or through the link in the video description. You will also find works from a very different series in the description, and I hope you explore them when you have a quiet moment. Take care until we meet again, and please come back for the next message from the world that sings.